Continuing with our virtual classroom series this week, I spoke with Emma Dorn, an education practice manager at McKinsey, and got her response to how students, teachers, and educators can stay nimble when we don't know what the future holds.
It's a tough situation for sure. I think there are some things that we can do that are super tactical and super immediate. The first is we need to ensure every student has access. Right now, Common Sense Media just put out a report which estimates that 15 to 16 million students actually lack access to adequate internet and devices. And the cost to fix that is not enormous. It's $6 to $11 billion across the whole of the United States. And those are reflected in some of those login numbers that we shared as well. 90% of high-income students are logging into remote learning, where only 60% of low-income students are. And that's a problem that we can fix.
Now, the education system is based on a centuries-old model. Do you see what's happening now potentially changing the education system as we know it? That perhaps innovation or something good will come out of this crisis?
There is the old adage, never waste a good crisis. That said, I think we also have to be really careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There's a lot of research around what works in education, and we don't want to throw that out. So what works in early literacy and numeracy programs? What works in terms of the criticality of getting good teachers and supporting those teachers to teach well? And the importance of really good formative assessment to understand what students are learning. That said, I do think, the technology has advanced and we need to be thinking about new ways of using that as we go forwards. And I can give a few examples if you're interested.
Like what?
So for example, technology does some things really well. Adaptive learning software, for example, can really help students to adopt a mastery-based approach where they really master one topic, especially in mathematics, before moving on to the next. But then technology also really doesn't do some things well, on the relationship side, for example. And we actually did some analysis of the 2018 PISA assessment results across 50 different countries. And what we found is that students who use a tablet in their classrooms actually perform half a grade below those students who don't in math, reading, and science. And so as we go forwards, it's really important to integrate the best of what we know about what works with tech, but not to uncritically just adopt a whole bunch of devices into the classroom.
Meantime, you've got some education systems out there looking to make some pretty dramatic changes, like some schools in Cleveland considering throwing out grade levels altogether. I mean, is that something good that should stay or something not so good that should go?
So, I think we're in the midst of a vast experiment right now, right? We have never had a shift to remote learning across the whole nation. And I think that those experiments are going to be important. And I think what we really need is data to understand which of these are working well and which of these are not working well. And scrapping grade levels is one example. Moving to a mastery-based learning approach more broadly is another example. But I think what's really important is that as we do these experiments, we're gathering the data we need to assess them and work out whether they're really delivering for our children.
You also talk about the importance of relationships. How do teachers foster relationships with students and parents with teachers and parents with their own children at this time?
And that is really critical. One of the things we've heard, especially from teachers, is that students are coming back into the classroom to some extent traumatized, right, by all of the trends that you've just been talking about. And as we think about how do we improve remote learning, that focus on relationships is critical. I can give a couple of examples of things that we've heard some teachers are doing. One is pulse checks at the beginning of every single day. Pulse checks. How are the students doing? Another is really checking in one-on-one with every single family and every single student. And an example of what some school districts are doing here is an assessment. So it's obviously critically important to work out at the beginning of the year, how much learning have these kids lost? But the last thing you want to do is bring kids back in and sit them down for a 4-hour test, right? When they're already in an emotional state that's slightly traumatized. And so what some districts are doing is instead of that, they're actually scheduling time one-on-one with each student, between the teacher and the student, to do reading assessments. And that way, you kill two birds with one stone. You both start to rebuild that student-teacher relationship, but you also understand exactly where that student is so that you can design curriculum to really help them catch up whatever they've missed.
You mentioned that the learning gap can have an impact on earning potential. What about on GDP? What about our economy as a whole?
Absolutely. So in that same report, we looked at the potential GDP loss, and we estimated that the GDP loss would be about 170 to 270 billion dollars per year once we hit steady state in 2040, and that's about a 1% loss of GDP. And we can avoid that loss by putting in really strong programs now to help kids catch up lost learning, making sure that they're still exposed to grade level learning, but that's matched with high intensity tutoring to help them fill in those gaps that they lost in the spring and maybe some are losing in the fall.